Good evening. You are entering the Comsat Zone. I am Joe. He is Nick. And this is the show where the enemy only has a few different things to say. Stop making me laugh right at the beginning of the show, Nick. Bail out. We surrender. I don't remember. Abandon ship. I'm going to write these down.
Bail out, abandon ship, take cover, and we surrender.
We surrender.
We surrender is always the last one.
Okay.
Because it takes time to float to Earth.
No, I get it. You have to. It's got to have a natural rhythm to it.
Right, and a progression. It takes time to float to Earth if you're bailing out. It takes time to swim to shore if you're abandoning ship. Taking cover is a last act of desperation. And we surrender is the whole point is there's no point fighting anymore. We're already beaten. That's why it's in that order. Anyhow, we have, as usual, a long list of things to discuss. Have you had any luck with the online side?
Just give me a second there, Nick. I'm just looking at something on the computer. Go ahead.
Okay. We've got a bunch of things on the table for you this evening. The California wildfires. We're going to talk about that. And if you are in touch with my Combat Zone Facebook page, which you can get to from my Facebook page for Nick Vandergraat. I went on a rant today about this, and I'll get into that. I won't do it now, but we will get into that shortly.
By the way, just a quick interruption. We forgot to activate the live player, but it's activated now.
Oh, there it is.
If anyone's looking for it, okay, well, they wouldn't have heard it. So I'm just for anyone that's sending you emergency messages on Facebook or anything like that, Nick. My bad, guys. My bad.
Yeah, well, we'll let him get away with it this time, but next time there's going to have to be serious consequences and retribution because we can't let that kind of technical malfeasance go. Anyway.
Malfeasance?
Hey, that's my word of the week. I don't even know what it means. I just like it. Sounds cool.
Okay.
Malfeasance. Anyway, so raising the party status here in the province of Ontario to 12 seats from 8. There's a lot to talk about there. Jim Acosta is the story out of the White House. He's the CNN reporter that got tossed from the press conference. There's a lot to talk about on that front. Driverless cars, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll get into that. And stupid politicians. We have a candidate which on one hand you might not suspect, and on the other hand, once you hear our logic and reasoning, you'll get it, you'll know why. Because believe me, this is not the brightest thing I've ever seen a politician do. And we can't keep picking on Nancy Pelosi and Justin Trudeau. We got to swap it up here. There's plenty of other stupid politicians out there.
Right.
So we decided to dip into another well.
Right.
So let's. Where do you want to start with the California wildfires, or where do you want to go?
Okay. Well, sure. Let's start with the wildfires.
All right. Now, I went on this rant on my Facebook page about the California wildfires because when you look at them on the news, they almost seem Old Testament plague style. You know, the locusts are coming and the frogs are fleeing the river, and the whole thing, all these biblical disasters are befalling California. Well, whether that's true or not, I am in no position to discern. But I think there is a far more reasonable man-made problem here.
Okay, so what are they blaming it on right now? I mean, I understand that Governor Brown down there, well, nobody talks about global warming anymore. You notice that?
Yeah, I know.
Because the whole global warming thing has been so badly discredited that nobody talks about it anymore. So what people do is they talk about climate change because climate change is entirely plausible.
Well, it's because the climate's always changing.
That's right. So for people who say, well, they don't believe, we don't believe in climate change. Well, we at the Combat Zone absolutely believe in climate change. We just deny that climate change is caused by, carbon dioxide. I try as I might. I just can't wrap my mind around the fact that my living and breathing, particularly or specifically, is causing climate change. And I'm willing to give you guys the benefit of the doubt as well, all of you listeners out there. I would say that your breathing is not contributing to climate change either. So, and even if it was, well, I'm not committing suicide for it, even though, I could get medical help to do that in Canada nowadays. But that's a separate subject altogether. I wonder if they would actually approve my request for physician-assisted suicide if I was doing it to help contribute to saving the planet from man-made climate change.
All you have to do is say, I'm a social conservative, and they will not only assist you, they will strap you down and give it to you anyway.
Yeah.
Because
it's an interesting question, though, because, they're not supposed to do it for... But if I'm really deeply depressed, if I'm legitimately just in terrible emotional pain because of the fact that, and this is an irreversible illness, you understand, okay?
Apparently.
Like if my breathing is actually one of the causes of the death of the earth, then surely to goodness,
there's no reversing
that's a terminal illness,
Yep.
and that would qualify me for physician-assisted
People will die if you keep
suicide.
breathing.
Yes, that's the theory anyway.
That's right.
When you boil it down to the most basic.
That's what it boils down to.
So Jerry Brown and many other people, Governor Brown in California, and many other people, the climate change catastrophists, as we like to call them, are saying that the wildfires that we're reading about in California and elsewhere are directly attributed to
People breathing.
people breathing when you get right down to it. Yeah.
When you boil it down to
Climate
its
changing,
core,
yeah.
that's what you have.
Stop breathing because you're
killing us.
California's burning because you're breathing.
Well, wouldn't it make sense for
It's kind of like,
Californians?
is that like kind of like being a dragon once removed? You're trying to wrap your mind around that. I
am. I know
just
people.
sprung that on Nick. He's looking at me. He's going, "What?"
I'm thinking, okay, I know some people who have really bad laser breath, but I don't think anybody set the bush on fire.
Puff the Magic Dragon. Don't go there, Nick. Don't go there. Okay, no, but
Okay.
let's we're just joking around. Let's get back to some serious stuff here
Okay,
because there
so-
are some serious issues involved here.
Okay, so let me kind of lay the groundwork for why I'm going to lay the blame, the majority of the blame for this at a particular set of groups' feet. If you go back into the early 1990s, I posted today a story from 1993, I think, out of the Washington Post. And it was about a guy called George Alexander who was working out of Clareton, California, in a sawmill. Big lumber town. The economy was all around, cutting trees and that kind of thing. And the environmentalists had decided, since they could not get California to curb logging because they figured every tree you cut down is a little cut of 1,000, the death of 1,000 cuts for the planet, I guess they forgot these things regrow when you cut them down. I mean, trees are just glorified weeds. You cut one down, another one pops up. It just takes them 30 or 40 years to get there, which goes by a lot faster than most people think. They couldn't get anywhere in the courts. They couldn't get anywhere in public opinion, so they took to what I call terrorist tactics, and they began to spike with heavy spikes and even railroad spikes in certain circumstances, trees in such a way that you couldn't see the spike. They would go in on an angle, bury the head below the bark, and then when the sawmill was sawing them, the saw would hit these things. Well, in this George Alexander's case, in this mill in California, he was a sawyer. And he was actually running the saw, standing 3 or 4 feet away. And these saws are huge. They're like 10, 15 feet across. They're big circular saws. So there's a lot of mass. And when they're spinning, they're not going slowly because the faster you go, the cleaner the cut. Okay? So the saw hits one of these spikes and absolutely explodes like a bomb. Some of it sticks in the log. The other half of it flies off in 100 pieces, one of which hits him in the face, goes right through his helmet and goggles, and cuts him along the one side, smashes his jaw, lacerates his eye, rips open the side of his head. How he survived, I have no idea. Now, that's a classic tactic of environmentalist terrorism, okay? Now, that's only one example of hundreds you could point to of these kinds of tactics being used, all for the whole point of cutting out if not limiting, then dramatically reducing logging in the Pacific Northeast and the Midwest of the United States. Now, remember something: the Midwest of the United States, up until about the 1990s, when all this started taking place, it had a forest that grew 25% faster than any other tract of land in the world.
So when you talk about the Midwest, you're talking about the middle of the western coast,
Colorado, Utah,
right.
Oregon, Washington State, all these places that were just thick with trees.
Right, Northern California.
And Northern California,
right.
Absolutely. Okay, so you've got this vast tract of land, and it outproduces every other tract of land because of climate, because of the weather, the constant rainfall. So what happened is, as the logging operations began to shut down, because of the success these people were having, not just with environmental terrorism, but they actually began to win people over who did not depend on logging for a living. They began to close down these mills or severely curtail them, and these little towns, like this one in California, began to die because there was no work for them anymore. The logging just simply stopped. Well, there were several consequences to that. First was the economic side, because the logging industry during the last 150 years in the middle of the United States was worth billions of dollars in economic activity. It employed tens of thousands of people and was the local economy for hundreds, if not thousands, of towns. So that all began to dry up. So now you have unemployment, you've got towns shutting down and people moving out because there's nothing left for them. They can't do their traditional line of work. So that's one thing. The economic impact was huge. The other thing is, because they're not in the bush taking out lumber on a regular basis, the trees then begin to, the trees that should have been taken out, when they reach a certain size and have a certain number of board feet of lumber in them, they die, as anything does, and some of them fell over, hit the ground, and would rot. But a lot of them would get hung up on their neighbors. They would fall like 30 or 40 degrees and just hang there. So when they dry out, because they're not on the ground, they're not soaking up water, you've got a whole new source of fire. And the trees that came up underneath them that would have been the young regrowth to replace them turned out, because they're so packed in and competing for space, to be very thin and tall and spindly and sickly. So on an acre of land where there used to be 65 healthy trees, now you've got 300 sickly ones. And they all die because nobody's cutting them. Now they can't fall over. So they dry out. So now you have another problem. Along with that, water isn't retained by the roots and by the ecosystem. So it runs off in flash floods in the springtime, and there's nothing left in these little streams that normally would bubble down the hills all summer. So the land dries out. So you've got all these problems compounding. Migration routes were changed. Caribou and bears would encounter people where they wouldn't normally encounter them, and that led to some very tragic incidents. So all this stuff lays the groundwork for these massive fires.
Right. Now, so what you're basically saying, Nick, is that human intervention in the forestry industry actually reduced the risk of these massive wildfires. And in fact, the wildfires that we're seeing now are actually going back to the natural way that, nature replenishes or destroys itself and then renews itself again. So in other words, it's the lack of human management of the forests that are actually leading to this proliferation of wildfires, and it's not actually human activity that's causing the fires, although there might have been in the first instance where some of these fires might have been started by
lightning
careless campfires or whatever, but it's actually not human activity that's leading to this through climate change, allegedly, okay? But it's actually reverting back to the normal way that nature renews itself over a period of time.
Right.
When they used to have these fires. So, yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it.
Within the fossil record, there are signs of continental-wide forest fires that would sweep from the east to the west coast. When before there was any kind of logging, or even before the indigenous people ended up here, they would just, because it was the only way it had to purge the land of all this stocked up fuel. So we had gotten to a point where the land was extremely productive. It was beneficial to both the ecosystem and to mankind, this symbiotic relationship they developed over a couple of centuries. And now all of a sudden you take that away, and nature does what it always does. It reverts back to what was before. The problem is now there's 300 million people living. There's 36 or 40 million people living in California alone.
Right.
And you've got, at the moment, there's 50 people dead and 80 people missing.
Right.
And I lay the blame for this at the feet of these groups who are environmentalist extremists who have taken it upon themselves to tinker with one of the systems of the planet as if somehow only they know how to fix it.
Well, it's not that they're it's in fact the opposite. It's not that they're tinkering with the system. It's that they're avoiding, or they're preventing us from tinkering with the system. And it's
fine.
the tinkering that actually mitigated the risk of these wild, out of control fires. And so people going, well, human intervention in the forests is bad in principle. Okay, so let's stop intervening and being involved and interfering in the forest growth, etc. And they were largely successful in forcing the forestry industry to stop doing that,
right.
Clearing away the underbrush, the dead wood, etc., as they harvested trees. And so what's happened is we've reverted back to nature, which in fact is out of control, which is where you have these out of control wildfires. So, just because, I guess the lesson to learn from all of this is, just because humans are intervening doesn't make it a bad thing.
Well, here's another example of the same thing. Before the Western Europeans got here and brought the horse, natives hunted for buffalo on foot. And there were tens of millions of buffalo roaming the grasslands of the center of the continent. And what the buffalo would do, they'd fertilize the ground through their manure, and then they would work it into the ground with their hooves, because they would move, the ground would shake, and there'd be tens of millions of them in herds. I mean, it was like shallow plowing, and that refreshed and renewed that top layer of soil every season. And what happened was, yes, when white man showed up, or the Western Europeans showed up, we pretty much eliminated the buffalo, but we didn't let the land sit fallow. We put beef cattle on it, and they did the same thing as the buffaloes did. On top of that, the ranchers would go out and they would drill wells and create ponds and put in little dams, places for the cattle to water. Well, cattle weren't the only ones drawing water from those. All the antelope, all the predators, all the other wild game would come to these places and drink where there was no water before. So the bounty of the plains actually increased many-fold. So now that they've driven a lot of the beef operations off the plains, the land is dying because there's nothing there to work it up. There's nothing there to fertilize it. And the grasses that were so vital to the environment are dying off, and they're turning into deserts. And this is another of these consequences of being careful what you ask for. You just might get it.
Right, which all leads us back to what our responsibilities should be. Our responsibility should be to be good stewards of the land. And good stewardship doesn't mean no stewardship. And part of the problem is that environmental radicals just don't want us to change nature, change the way. I'm not expressing it very well, because when I say change nature, I'm trying to think to shape nature according to the way we want it to be shaped.
Yeah, we work. It's like clay. You work and mold it, right, to produce something.
Right. So this is the consequence in California. This is the consequence of less management, less intervention, and letting nature revert back to its quote-unquote natural state.
And this is yes, and this is why I'm laying the blame, a large part of the blame for what's going on now, not only in California, but all up and down the western seaboard of North America, because there are big fires in BC too, and there's big fires all up and down the coast in Canada and in the United States. I'm laying the blame for this, for the loss of life, for the loss of private property, at the feet of people like Earth First, World Wildlife Fund, Greenpeace, all these environmentalist terrorists who go around trying to enforce, by force, using violence on the rest of us because they want this Norman Rockwell kind of a picture of what the place should look like. And even Norman Rockwell will admit his United States never looked like that. It was an ideal, but it was never, in large part, what it looked like.
Or on the contrary, maybe at some point in time before the arrival of, mankind or
Perhaps.
humankind. Sorry, guys, humankind. Don't send your emails in.
It's okay to say mankind. I can live with it.
All right. What was it that Justin Trudeau called it?
People kind.
People kind. Okay. Right? Okay, we meant people kind. Okay.
And that's it just blows my mind. And this is why I'm on a rant about it.
Look, the bottom line is this, okay? First of all, as a matter of just making sure people understand this, your activity, your breathing is not causing climate change.
No, it's not.
Number one. Number two, climate change is not leading to California wildfires. The big fire in Alberta in Fort McMurray last year, was it last year or the year before? I've forgotten.
A couple of years ago now.
Was not caused by climate change.
No.
And look, I think the takeaway from all of this is that human intervention, that changing the face of nature, working with it, taming it, is the word we used to use, is a good thing, as long as it's done with a certain amount of wisdom. And the problem, of course, with the environmental lobby is that they don't want us to be doing any of that.
Right.
And, I'm sorry, guys, but, I can't help but notice that you probably went into the kitchen and turned on the tap and had a glass of water, okay? So, and you probably drive your car. And if you're not driving your car to and from work or whatever you do during the day, you're taking public transit. And if you're not taking public transit, okay, you're riding your bike on, get ready, wait for it, a bike lane. So whatever happens, we're carving out, we're putting our stamp on the natural habitat. And it's not a bad thing, even for environmentalists.
Well, I have yet to find...
get with the program, guys.
There are very, very few. Now, I'm not going to say there's none, but there's very, very few. You have to be really hardcore environmentalist. And by that, I'm talking about the extreme. I'm not... let me make this point clear. I'm not talking about people who think it's a bad idea to change your oil in your driveway and dump the used lubricant down a drain. Nobody I know thinks that way. It's not the people who worry about whether we have clean water or that our reserves are under a boil water advisory or that we're burying our garbage and we shouldn't be, or there's raw sewage pouring into our water courses. Those are not the kind of environmentalists. I think those are real environmentalists dealing with real problems, okay? It's the ones who think it's okay to spike a tree knowing that there's the potential for serious physical harm to somebody.
So, Nick, here's my environmental policy. If I ever run for public office, which, by the way, guys, I'm just not going to do it, okay? Because I don't just have skeletons in the closet. I have a whole graveyard of skeletons in the closet. No, I'm joking, of course. Look, and who would subject themselves to the kind of well, that's a separate subject altogether. But if I was to run for office, and anyone who's going to ask me what I think the environmental policy should be, is very simple: clean air, clean land, clean water.
Amen.
No, forget about climate change. Okay, just live your lives, be good stewards of the environment. Okay, don't be afraid to drive your car. Be responsible. And let's spend some money making sure that we have clean air, clean land, clean water. It is absolutely criminal that we would talk about spending any money on fighting climate change through international agreements like the Paris Climate Change Accord when we have dozens of communities in this country, one of the richest countries in the world, where you still have to boil water 2 or 3 times a year because your water is not clean. There's a serious problem with that. And I say before you start talking about saving the environment 200 or 300 years from now, from that terrible poison carbon dioxide that you keep on breathing out, before you get into that, let's make sure that we have clean air, clean land, clean water. Here's an interesting thing, okay? I know I'm always saying we don't want to talk about local issues too much because we have a broader audience, but here in Ottawa, we pump still into the Ottawa River hundreds of thousands of gallons or liters or whatever measurement you want to use of raw sewage into the water
every time it rains.
Okay, and I'm thinking to myself, why in heaven's name would you spend 1 penny on preventing climate change in the Sahara Desert? Okay, when you're still doing this, we have real problems, issues that need to be addressed right here at home now. That's where our money should be spent. That's where we should be paying attention.
And all of that is so much common sense. And the problem with common sense is I watched it run down the highway 20 years ago with its head on fire, screaming it was never coming back, and it hasn't been seen since. Because when you listen to the pundits who disagree with you, they think that this is the greatest calamity ever to face mankind. We have to do something now. Well, I've been hearing that for over 20 years now, 20 maybe longer, that we have to do something now. Well, define the word now, because you've stretched that quite a bit.
I don't have to do something now.
No,
the fact is, if the climate is going to change, and it's going to change regardless of what you and I do.
Precisely, and that's my point.
And so what we should, if you're going to spend money on climate change, if that's really the issue, stop trying to stop climate change and start spending some money on mitigating the consequences of climate change.
It's called adapting.
Adapting, exactly.
Yeah.
The thousands of people who died in New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina did not die because of climate change. They died because the infrastructure that was meant to prevent, to mitigate the damage, the levees and the dams,
failed.
They failed because they were not being properly maintained. They were inadequate. And what I'm saying is spend some money protecting people from the effects of climate change, alleged effects of climate change.
Right.
Because, look, whether you have five hurricanes a year or 6 hurricanes a year, okay, you're still going to have hurricanes. And that's where the money should be spent.
Well, what I would like to hear, just as we go into the break here, is for somebody who is absolute, in the Church of Climatology and is absolutely convinced that we need to do something right now, I'd like to hear them explain to me why Canada being a half a degree to a degree and a half hotter 90 years from now is a bad thing.
Oh, for Canada, it's a good thing. It would be a huge benefit.
Well,
because look at all the land that we have right now that is not arable. That would all of a sudden you would be able to cultivate this land. It would be a huge benefit to climate change if we had 1 or 2 degrees hotter.
Think of the drop in energy consumption,
and which would be good for the environment.
Precisely, that's my point. So let's go outside. We'll pop a couple bottles of pop open and let the carbon free. Free the carbon.
Free the carbon dioxide.
Okay, call it what you want.
Okay, we're going to take a bit of a break, and we'll catch you guys back on the other side.
Okay, welcome back to the, I almost said the chat room. Yeah, that too. Back to the combat zone, folks, where the enemy only has 4 things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender.
Okay. Show me up, Nick. Show me up.
Yeah. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and we've got another 90 minutes to go. We just went over this whole California fires thing. We're going to move on, but I got to tell you, I really honestly think that if there's a legal case to be made, it should be made against these environmentalist terrorist groups like Earth First and all these different groups out there who advocate and put into practice these environmental terrorist actions that lead to loss of life, loss of property, personal injury, that kind of stuff. Man, I would love to see that lawsuit. All right.
Okay, well let's talk about a different kind of terrorism.
That's just where I was going.
Jim Acosta, who could not be more appropriately named. And Jim Acosta is, for those who don't know, is a CNN reporter. And, you know, if you're following the news, you know this guy has been having an ongoing battle with President Trump down in the United States. And he recently had his press pass to the White House removed or suspended. And he and CNN, where he works, I think I already said that.
Yes.
Is suing now the White House, suing Donald Trump specifically, and other members of the administration involved in communications. And their allegation is that by barring Jim Acosta from the White House press briefings, that they're violating the First Amendment, freedom of the press, or freedom of expression.
That's
and
right.
whatever the two, I don't know the numbers of the amendments, but freedom of the press and freedom of expression are the two that are being cited. Now, if you've been listening to the show, you know that I have a lot of respect for Donald Trump and what he has accomplished so far, but it's mixed. It's mixed. There are a number of things that I don't really like about Donald Trump. So I'm not going to defend him in principle, but I will say this. I've been watching a number of the press briefings with Sarah Sanders, and is her married name. That's what she goes by now, I guess. And she's the White House press officer. She's the one that conducts the daily briefings. And I have to tell you that I have been, frankly, appalled by the behavior of Jim Acosta in these press conferences and the press briefings. I don't know what it is with him. But he is completely, he's very rude. He really is. I mean, Donald Trump called him rude, and I'll get to that in a second. I mean, he hit the nail on the head. This guy is rude. He's very, very inconsiderate of not just whoever is conducting the press conference, the briefing, but his fellow journalists, where he hogs the limelight, he hogs the questions. I mean, the way these press briefings go is everybody gets as many people as possible within whatever the timeline is of the press briefing. They all get a chance to ask one, maybe two questions, and that's just to be fair to everybody. When Jim Acosta starts asking questions, he'll ask one question, he'll ask two questions, then he'll get into an argument. He'll argue the point, whatever the point is. You know, is it raining outside? Well, no, Jim, it's not raining outside. Well, are you sure? No, Jim. Yes, Jim, I'm sure. Well, how do you define rain? I think it's raining outside. You know, look, I think there's rain outside. I mean, he'll argue the point over and over and over again. He's very argumentative, which is not the role of the press. The press, ask your questions and write your story, do your reporting. That's what the role of the press is. But no, he feels that he's got to challenge, to argue, it's not even probing. And even if it was probing, okay, the proper way of doing it is, if you have 5 or 6 questions that you need to have a more in-depth interview, or you want to delve into a subject deeper, you set some time aside with the press officer, with the press secretary, with the briefing person, and you do that offline. so that you're showing respect and consideration to your fellow journalists who aren't following the same story perhaps that you are and want to ask their own questions about their own subjects. What Jim Acosta did in this briefing, in this press conference that President Trump was holding, was mild, in my judgment, compared to how he behaves day in and day out in the daily press briefings.
But everything, you reach a tipping point.
Right.
And after a while, it doesn't matter how big or small the issue is, you've just had enough.
And so, okay, so Acosta got a chance. He asked a question, and the way he framed it in the press conference with the president was, he framed it as, "I want to challenge your view of this." Okay, well, right away, that's not the way you ask a question. Okay, what do you mean you want to challenge me? Ask me a question. So it had to do with the migrant caravan in Mexico approaching the U.S. border, and so he said something along the lines of, "I want to challenge your view that this is an invasion." So Trump said, "Well, that's what I call it. I think it's an invasion." And what was Acosta's response? "No, it's not." And well, Trump said, "Well, that's what I call it." So they went back and forth, and he answered, "What you call it an invasion? Yeah, I call it an invasion." Back and forth they went for a minute, and then it was somebody else's turn. And Acosta did not want to give that. He's standing up. He's in the front row. He's got the microphone. A White House aide comes and tries to take the microphone from him because it's somebody else's turn, and he refuses to give her the microphone. I don't know if he really shoved her in that. I looked at it.
That's
it didn't
besides
look to be,
the point.
It didn't look to me to be that serious. Some people feel it's more serious than I do, but everyone's entitled to their opinion on that. But you're right. It's beside the point. The fact is that he got to ask his question. He got to ask a follow-up question, but he kept on and on and on and on and on, which is what he does. Now, I don't care whether it's Donald Trump. I don't care whether it's the President of the United States. I don't care about any of this stuff. It's just common professional decency and courtesy. And day in and day out, he violates those basic principles. And so I think that the president was remarkably restrained. Now, finally, he said, "You're a rude person. You're a terrible person. You're rude. Sit down. Shut up." Donald Trump being Donald Trump, saying what was absolutely the truth.
That's right.
Inelegantly. Okay?
But
he
that's
was
Donald
speaking
Trump.
he was speaking Trumpian. Okay?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay. So I wouldn't use Trumpian language. But Donald Trump was not wrong. He was absolutely not wrong, and the White House was absolutely not wrong to say to Jim Acosta, "You know what? You have to go for a timeout because you are not conducting yourself properly and professionally." So there it is. So now they're suing, and tonight's Wednesday. It's the 14th of November. My understanding is that there's actually going to be some kind of a preliminary or an emergency hearing on this question tomorrow, Thursday. So we'll see what the outcome is.
Well, the people who are defending Costa are saying this is a violation of freedom of speech. And
I don't see how that is possible.
First of all, when you're in a press conference, you agree to certain terms and conditions under which you will behave, which you've already laid out. You ask a question, you ask a follow-up, if there's a relevant follow-up to it, and then you bow out and let somebody else have their turn. It's like a merry-go-round can only hold so many people, so you get 5 or 6 laps, you get off and let somebody else have a turn. That's not the way he conducted himself. So this is not a violation of freedom of speech, because freedom of speech doesn't mean you get to grill the president during a press conference. You ask him a question because that's your job. If you want to debate the president, as somebody I know rather well said a little earlier, then run for president and you'll get your chance. You can do it in an open forum where millions of people will watch you, and you can make any point that you want. Or if you really feel like protesting, there is that large lawn in front of the White House, where you can take your placard, put anything on it you want, walk up and down there, and scream and shout till your head falls off. That's freedom of speech.
Well, yeah, you're not. Nobody's there to listen to your freedom of speech.
No.
Okay, at the press briefing, you're there. This is the president or whoever happens to be doing the press conference. It's their time to say what they have to say, and you're reporting on it. Ask questions, convey this information to the general public. If you have an opinion, everybody's got the right to an opinion.
That's right.
If Jim Acosta wants to give his opinion and exercise his right to free speech, I'm all for it. Take it outside.
That's exactly.
You want to debate the president of the United States? You don't think Donald Trump should be the president of the United States? Here's a possibility. Run for president. Maybe you'll get to stand beside him in a podium with a national audience, and I guess then you'd have to get organized and raise money and all that stuff. So,
and who wants
running
to do
for
that?
President is
that's work.
Well, yeah, yeah.
So I just hand him a Bristol board with a marker with a little 1x2 piece of stick and a staple gun and say, go have your protest outside. Say whatever you want to on that. But when you're in the White House and you're in the press gallery and you're standing in front of whether it be Sarah Sanders or Huckabee or whatever name you want to choose for, or the president or the vice president or any official of the White House, there's a certain amount of respect that follows the office. It's like when you and I were in the service. You'd salute the officer even if you hated his guts. Why? Because you weren't saluting him. You were saluting the Queen's commission that he held. And it's the same thing here. You have a certain amount of respect you must show the office of the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Canada or the Prime Minister of Britain. Any elected official, a head of state, is due a certain amount of respect just because they hold that office.
Well, you see, but Nick, I wouldn't even go that far. I hear the argument you're making. I don't disagree with it, but again, I'm trying to convey the purpose of a press conference and the purpose of the press. Okay, if you have an opinion and you want to express your opinion and you want to say Donald Trump is wrong and he's an idiot or he's whatever he is. There's a time and a place for that. You don't even have to. You don't want to. We were already saying, take it outside, protest on the sidewalk outside of the White House. But you don't even have to do that, okay? Write a column, an editorial. Become an editorial writer instead of a reporter, okay? The role of the press is to report what the president is saying. The role of the parliamentary press here in Canada is to report on what the Prime Minister or the ministers are saying or members of Parliament are saying.
Right.
Okay? That's what you're supposed to do. We, the people, the citizens of the country, okay, we need to hear unvarnished, uninterpreted, black and white what these people are saying. We're not stupid. We don't need to have the president's information or message or the prime minister's message or information. We don't need it distilled. We don't need it presented to us through the lens of the press, okay? We don't need their interpretation. We're not stupid, okay? We just want to hear what they have to say, and so report. That's what your job is. The person up on the podium, their job is to convey a message. Now, they may spin it, they may, doctor it, they may, dress it up the way they dress it up. I get that, okay? The job of the press is not to explain that that's what's happening, okay? We understand that that happens, okay? Sometimes we care, sometimes we don't care. We're not stupid. Just give us the facts as they're being presented. You are a conduit of information, okay? Now, if the president is lying, okay, and it's factual, and that's the story you're going to write, okay, right. The president said this, but here's the information from this other source. That's decide, fair, okay? But your job is not to hog the mic. That's just not your job.
Well,
Let the other people ask questions.
The part that I'm wondering about, and you and I did discuss a little bit before the show, was how angry the people behind Mr. Acosta must be. And there's a little old phrase called barnyard justice, where when you were misbehaving, you got a little trip out behind the barn. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying that sooner or later, your colleagues are going to get mighty offended at you and try to get the message across that they want their time too, and it's unfair for you to hog it all.
Yeah, and I'm a little disappointed that some of the other reporters who are not happy with Jim Acosta, they do believe, not all of them, but a goodly number of them, and I know I've talked to some people who are involved, who have connections to the White House press corps, and what I'm told is that there are a lot of reporters in that room on a daily basis who are just tired of Jim Acosta for the two reasons. The first is they really don't believe he's behaving appropriately. They are embarrassed by his showmanship,
right,
day in and day out. But as a practical matter, they want to ask questions too. They work for other news organizations. Some people who are in that room also work for CNN, ironically, and they get paid to go to the press briefings and ask questions. And it's tough enough already to get your questions in because there are a lot of reporters that attend these daily briefings, and there's
Only
a limited amount
window
of time. And so when Jim Acosta hogs the mic and doesn't shut up and doesn't let other people take a turn, they can't do their job. Now, I guess what I'm disappointed with is that they aren't speaking up publicly, and they ought to. Okay, they ought to, because they would give the whole situation of the media a lot more credibility if they were speaking up.
Chastising one of their own for being an
just
idiot.
Speak up. Just speak. Look, you talk about speaking truth to power. Okay, and I don't think that's the job of the press, but if you're going to be a tough reporter with the president, don't you think you should start by being tough with yourself and with your own colleagues, professional colleagues,
don't hold others
or
to
unprofessional
standards.
colleagues, as the case may be?
Don't hold others to standards you're not willing to live up to yourself.
Exactly.
It's called hypocrisy.
Exactly.
And this is the kind of thing, and I am sure, I'm really hoping there's people behind him leaning forward and say, "Thanks, Ace. Next time, let us ask a question." And sooner or later, one way or another, because I don't see this lawsuit going anywhere. I think this is just showmanship on CNN's part.
Hard to say, because of the way the courts are these days in the United States. It all depends on what kind of a judge you get. But
I suppose that's true, because I know if I was a judge,
and the same thing here in Canada, and the same thing in Great Britain, and the same thing in France. I mean, the fact is that the judiciary, subject for another show, but the judiciary in the United States and in Canada, and that they have become the new legislators, if you will, and completely unaccountable in Canada, at least. In some jurisdictions in the United States, judges are elected.
Yeah.
So who knows how it's going to go? Who knows how it's going to go?
Well, if common sense prevails, let's put that caveat in there, then this won't last a day. The judge will look at it and say, "Get out of my courtroom," which is what I really think should happen. And that would be me as judge, which is never going to happen. I'm not going to get appointed justice of the peace, never mind anybody else, just because my view of these kind of things is hardly what you would call calm, cool, and collected. And I think that's one of the first requirements you need as a judge, to stay calm and cool in heated situations. Anyway, with that said, how we fixed? We've got, okay. Where do you want to go next?
Where do we want to go next?
Yeah, because I think we've milked this cow pretty dry.
Okay. Well, we have a few minutes here before break, so that can only mean one thing.
That's what I thought you might say.
Okay, Stupid politician time.
Yeah, that sound means it's time for stupid politicians. And as I referred to before, we've dipped from a little bit different well this week because it's all the well for Justin Trudeau and Nancy Pelosi and Madeleine Albright. Is she still? I don't even know if she's still even around.
She's around.
Oh no, you know who I'm thinking of? It's Maxine
of,
Waters.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, there's plenty of stupid politicians.
Rachel Notley.
Rachel Notley.
Kathleen Wynne. I think Kathleen Wynne's still
Where
around.
Where is the end of the bottom of that well?
Okay, look, but our nominee for this week is Patrick Brown.
It's got to be.
It's got to be Patrick Brown, who is just about to release a book. There's excerpts have already been released to the press, and he's done some interviews around it about his time as leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario and his rapid departure. It was a palace coup. Let's call it what it was.
Yep.
When allegations came to the surface became public about some sexual misconduct, and we're not talking Tony Clement here. We're talking about Patrick Brown. Okay, and in fairness to Patrick, he denies all of this stuff. He continues to deny what he was accused of, and there is a legal case pending right now. He's suing the media outlets that reported on this stuff. It's CTV, I believe it is.
I think so.
For a significant amount of money. And so we're not going to comment here on whether he is guilty of what he was accused of or not. That's beside the point. He wrote a book, and I'm not even going to criticize him for. And actually, it's a serious topic here. I'm not going to criticize Patrick Brown for writing the book, and I understand. He has hard feelings about what happened to him, about being dumped so unceremoniously as the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. I get it, but in particular, in his book and in interviews that he's been giving, he has been talking about Lisa MacLeod, who is the member of the provincial parliament for the riding of Nepean, which happens to be the riding that we're sitting in now, I believe, but it's the riding I live in. Okay, I shouldn't have said that because now people are going to be able to start to narrow in on where they're going to start to triangulate. Anyway, look, bottom line is, so Patrick goes after Lisa in these press interviews and in the book, and in the interviews that he's been given, he's talking about her mental illness, and he's talking about how he's even questioning whether or not she has had any kind of struggles with mental illness, or was she just faking it for sympathy? I think it was. If you need an example, anybody needed proof of how unsuitable Patrick Brown would have been as premier of this province,
that's it.
I think that's it. I think it's ungracious of him. I think it's shameful of him for doing this, for saying the kind of unkind and vindictive things he said about Lisa MacLeod. Look, you want to criticize Lisa for her behavior in certain areas. You want to criticize her for her stand on policy. You want to criticize her for political maneuvering, all of that stuff. That's part of, that's the nature of the beast in politics. But to suggest that she didn't have any mental illness and emotional struggles when she clearly did, and she had the courage to talk about them publicly, and to suggest that she only did that to garner the sympathy vote in the election, or even worse, that that she invented this all of this. It was all fake. I think that's a terrible and shameful thing.
It's a really low blow.
It's beyond low blow.
Yeah.
And all I can say again is it's an example of how unsuited he was to be the premier of this province ultimately, and certainly the leader of the Conservative Party of Ontario.
Well, one of the things when I first heard about this, the first thought through my mind was, why write a book in the first place? accept the fact that you're no longer the head of the organization. You just became the mayor of Brampton. Concentrate on that. Keep your head down. Rebuild your reputation, and come back 4 or 8 years from now. He's not that old a man. All he had to do was shut his mouth and be the mayor of Brampton. He won that fair and square. As far as I know, there was no chicanery. He actually, he went out and won a hard-fought battle to be the mayor of Brampton. Okay, take glory in that if you want to, but to come out and trash your former colleagues in the way that he's done in this book is categorically one of the dumbest things I've seen a politician do since the last time we did this.
And Nick, you and I have known some dumb politicians.
We have
over the years.
We have.
But again, I want to emphasize, I don't have a problem with him, unlike you, Nick, writing a book. I don't have a problem with him doing that. I don't have a problem with him wanting to get his side of the story out. I may have a problem with him, wanting to get his pound of flesh, if you will, and have some sort of political revenge. I don't like that. I don't approve of that, but I understand it. People do this. Politicians do this. And so on that, I'm willing to cut him some slack. But I'm not going to cut him any slack when it comes to the way that he has treated and spoken of Lisa MacLeod. It was completely uncalled for. There was no evidence. It was shameful. And as I said, good riddance, Patrick Brown.
With that, the only question left in my mind is to what end? I mean, if not just to gut Lisa MacLeod, why did he write the book? I haven't come up with a decent answer yet. He should have just stayed mayor of Brampton, rebuilt his reputation, and taken the high road and shut his mouth and be mayor.
Okay, that's Stupid Politicians for this week.
That it
is. And what else is going on here? I guess we're going to go for a break here, Nick.
Yep.
I think we're coming up to the top of the hour. And I'm trying to think of something witty to say.
Well, you guys stay right there. We'll be back with more right after this.
Okay. Okay, welcome back. It's hour 2 of the Combat Zone. I'm Joe, he's Nick. And our number to call, by the way, if you want to call in and join the conversation and tell us where we're wrong, where we're right, call us names. Well, call nicknames, okay? Whatever. Toll free anywhere in North America.
Call nicknames.
Call Nick a nickname.
Oh, okay.
Call Nick a nickname. Okay, so our number to call, seriously, anywhere in North America, toll-free, if you want to join in, is 844-415-2115. Don't feel obliged, but if you want to, we'd be happy to have a talk with you. And or you could join us in the chat room. I'm sorry, guys. I'm feeling a little distracted tonight. It's winter here. I mean, we have snow outside. It's cold, going down to minus 15 here tonight.
What?
Yeah, sure. You didn't know that? So we were out earlier this evening for a few minutes, and it's gotten cold out. So anyway, but there's lots of places in Canada where there's snow. So don't feel that you're going to rush to your computer, look for snow on the ground, and go, okay, now I know where they're broadcasting from. Anyway, in all seriousness, don't forget you can join us in the chat room. Just go click on the chat bubble in the live player on the website. And if you haven't registered, you may have to register. It's totally free. And and then you can jump into the chat room and have your say about just about anything. So, what are we going to talk about the second hour here? Oh, this is interesting, Nick. The city of Calgary has been talking for a while, planning to have a bid for one of the Olympics. I don't know which one.
It's
usually
two
bid.
Elections ahead, or two elections. Where the heck's my head?
Two Olympic
Olympics
Games ahead.
I think it is
something like that. And they did some preparatory work, etc. But then they had a referendum this week. Was it this week or last week? That's not. It doesn't matter.
The results came out today.
Okay, and the citizens of Calgary have voted to not make a bid for the Olympics. Now, I actually think this is the first time that anyone has put this question to a referendum within the jurisdiction that's making the bid. So that's the first thing, and certainly because it's the first time, nobody's ever rejected it. But is this an indication of the dissatisfaction, the disillusionment that people have with the Olympics in general? And is this an indication that the Olympics are dying?
I don't know about dying, but I do know it certainly is a jadedness in the general population, because ultimately, who pays the bill for this thing? If you look back over, when I say recent history, I'm talking about the last 30 or 40 years, finding a Olympic Games that actually even broke even, never mind make money, is very difficult. I think the last one that actually made any coin at all was in 1984 in Los Angeles, when the Russians all stayed home, because in 1980, Jimmy Carter kept all the Americans home because that's when they invaded Afghanistan.
The Russians. The
Russians invaded Afghanistan.
That's when the Russians invaded Afghanistan.
Well, Afghanistan has been invaded so many times by so many different groups. You could say they invaded Afghanistan and had a 90% chance of getting it right.
But it's important to point this out seriously, because there's a whole generation now that has grown up with the American and Canadian and British intervention in Afghanistan.
Right.
And so when we're talking about the invasion of Afghanistan, I'm sure that there are listeners out there who are going to be thinking that it's the American invasion.
No.
So we're talking about in 1979, the Russians, the old Soviet Union, invaded
Afghanistan
and occupied Afghanistan.
That's right. And that worked really well.
Not really.
I was being facetious.
You were being facetious.
Very. So anyway, as far as
it didn't
goes,
work out well for the Russians.
No, it was their Vietnam, I think is what they labeled it. Anyway, so in other words, if you can look back a long way, and other than even in 1984, I think that's the exception at the rule, because 1976 in Montreal was no winner financially.
No, we were paying for that for a long time.
1988 in Calgary, the Winter Olympics.
And the funny thing is, they're not even using the facilities there. Well, they a little bit. They use some of them, but the Olympic Stadium is rarely used now.
I think it's partially condemned, isn't it? Chunks of concrete.
It's funny because it's the only place in the world where chunks of concrete keep falling. Bridges. I mean, the province of Quebec. It's such an odd thing. And we could. There's a show, but we're not going to do that right now.
Okay. Yes, but anyway, the point I'm making is, I think people have looked back and said, first of all, the performance-enhancing drug scandals that go on at Olympics, the bribery, the corruption. There was one high-ranking European official with the Olympic Organizing Committee, the OIC, was arrested in his hotel room running a scalping operation. Okay, now, I can't remember what city he was in, but the point is, this is the kind of thing that people have said they're just fed up with it, because
scalping is in selling tickets illegally.
Yes, it's in selling tickets.
I just had this picture of this middle-aged or this elderly Olympic official from France
with a knife. Actually, I'll tell you a real quick side story. I love
Nick's side stories.
Oh, you're going to love this one. I have a 16-year-old daughter.
Hang on just a second.
Here you go.
Nick's side stories.
There you are. Anyway, she was...
wait for the music to finish, Nick. Okay, go.
Okay, so she's on the school bus one morning, and she's a pretty stout young lady. Okay, when you grow up on a
Oh
farm,
my goodness.
she's.
I can't believe you just said that.
It's a
believe
term
you.
of endearment. I mean, she is,
Of course.
in what course? She's very physically strong.
Yes.
She's very
stout.
very nice young lady.
Of course.
Very attractive young lady. Just don't mess with her.
Yes. Nick has
Anyway,
wonderful children, by the
I
way.
do.
I've met them.
I do. And when they're asleep, they're angels. When they're awake, not so much. Anyway, she was going to school one morning, and they get on the bus. It was in the dark, and one of her bus mates, one of the students on the bus with her, was being an absolute jerk, and she has a temper. And she'd hit the roof. She'd had enough of this guy. So she got up out of her seat, put her nose within a half an inch of his, and snarled at him, "If you don't shut up and sit down, I will scalp you with my teeth." So when you mentioned the old French politician with the knife and scalping people, that's the first image I had in my mind. I said, I know somebody who would actually do that. And of course, it happens to be a blood relative. So there you go. That's my side story. So getting back to the Olympics, why was I expecting music? Anyway, I think people just hit the wall and said, look, it's always us that pays for this. It's not the OIC. There's no general fund they draw from to pay for this. We've had enough. We don't want to get stuck with this white elephant. Like in '88, they had the Winter Olympics in Calgary. I know the guy personally who built the snowmaking equipment there. It was a revolutionary. Okay, well, who cares? That's a different story. But the point is that I don't know how much of that facility is left. Now, granted, that was back in '88. But how long does a rink last? How long does a ski hill last or a bobsled run? Now, maybe the bobsled run takes more maintenance, but a ski hill, it's just a piece of ground that happens to have a deep slope to it. Okay, so if you can't maintain and reuse these things, other than for the Olympics themselves, what's the point of training? Because the logic behind it has always been, well, the country that gets them will now have modern world-class training facilities to train their athletes for the Olympics the next time around.
Right, but not just training facilities. They get to use these as sport facilities for different activities. And in the case of the Montreal Olympics, for years afterwards, well, I guess for 4 or 5 years or however long it was. No, it was more than 4 or 5 years. The Montreal Expos played at Olympic Stadium.
Yes,
the Major League
then the
Baseball
team
folded. Before, well, they didn't fold. They moved. They moved to. How did it work? Okay, let's not get into that. It was complicated how that all worked out, and I think that the arena that they built for the Olympics in Calgary, the Winter Olympics. The hockey arena I think they use that still for the NHL
talking about the Saddle
team.
Dome?
The Saddle Dome. I'm pretty sure the Saddle Dome was built for
I don't know,
for the Olympics. But anyway, but you're right. In Montreal, the professional football team, the CFL team, the Montreal Alouettes, played for a number of years in Olympic Stadium. But it's more than 60,000 seats, and the reality is, you don't get 60,000 people coming out to watch football games in Canada. Although for a couple of years, you were getting, the 50,000 plus crowds coming for Major League Baseball when the Expos were in town. But it's not a very good facility right now. I don't know that anybody is using the Olympic Stadium. They call it the Big O.
Yes, they do.
And I don't think they appreciated the irony in using that nickname when they came up with it. Some of the other facilities are being used still in the Olympic site, and the housing that they built, the Olympic Village for the athletes, I think is being used now in Montreal for they're renting it, their subsidized housing, if I'm not mistaken. So you can use these facilities, but my sense is that the Olympics, just in general, is that I don't know. People just don't seem to care that much anymore.
Look at the Summer Olympics.
I don't know. Maybe it's there's some of the scandals and the drugs, etc.
I think that all plays into it.
but I just don't think people care anymore.
Well, ask yourself this question. During the last Summer Olympics, I believe they were in Russia. Okay, that whole thing.
The Winter Olympics were in Russia.
Where was the last summer ones?
Oh gosh, guys, Nick,
This is
you're
how much
asking
we
me
care.
these questions. Yeah, no. London was 2012, so 2016.
Was it Tokyo?
Might have been Tokyo. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, ask yourself this question. Whether it was Tokyo or who cares what city it was in, what track and field event did you watch?
Well, I didn't watch any of it, Nick.
Precisely. What sport did you watch any of the Summer Olympic sports?
I think my wife is a swimmer, and she's interested in when she sees
The swimming and the diving?
Swimming, well, the swimming.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, not the diving so much, but the swimming. So she'll watch some swimming events, etc. But what's the difference? So they have the Olympics every 4 years, but they have the World Championships every year.
Right.
They have the Commonwealth Games every 4 years. They
Right.
have, at some point in time, the Olympics just aren't as big as they seemed at one point in time.
Well, here's what's been suggested, and that is if you want to bring back the nostalgia and cut down on a lot of the corruption, because a lot of it is around the construction of the facilities, going back to the Winter Olympics in Russia. How many people were walking into the buildings in the athletes' village, and they weren't even finished yet.
Well, they were. Look at the Olympics, the China and the Beijing Olympics, where they were evicting people from their homes to build facilities.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, imagine how much homelessness was caused.
Even for just the 2 weeks.
The irony is really quite fantastic when you think about it.
And the sad part is that for the Olympic athletes who train for years, like we have a world-class athlete right here in Eganville, and she was decathlon? Not decathlon, the
judo.
She's
right?
a runner. No, she's a runner.
She's a runner? Okay.
And I can't remember her name, but I could look it up on Google if I really wanted to. But that girl has spent her whole life, her whole adult life, training for her whole career in the Olympics might last 4 events. Okay, that's 16 years.
Right.
And she's done. And that'll be it.
Right.
So the heartbreak is these people pour their heart and souls into this, and interest drops, and it doesn't have the glory it used to. So what's been suggested is that we pick a place for the Summer Olympics, Greece, where they started.
Sure.
So let's go back to Greece. We'll build a facility, a world-class facility for all the events right there in Greece. You know where they're going to be. All you have to do is maintain them. You don't have to rebuild the rocket ship every time you want to leave the planet. You just have the facility right there. It'd be like building a new Cape Canaveral every time you want to send the space shuttle up. Okay, we don't have to do that now. We have a place. Okay, so in the wintertime, or for the Winter Olympics, you pick another place. Maybe it's in Switzerland. Maybe it's in Canada. Maybe it's in Norway. Who cares? Pick a spot, build a facility, and that's where the Winter Olympics are. And then you cut out 90% of this horse hockey, this nonsense that goes along with these bids. You don't have cities competing with each other and trying to put their best foot forward, and all the scandals that end up around the building of these places. None of that happens. And I think that would go a long way, as well as cleaning up their act when it comes to doping. Well, performance-enhancing drugs. We don't all, but a lot of us are old enough to remember Ben Johnson and what that was all about.
Well, not just Ben Johnson. I mean, look at the huge scandal surrounding doping in Russia.
Oh yeah,
which didn't just involve one athlete.
It was
of course,
it was systemic.
And of course, prior to the fall of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, the Eastern European countries, East Germany, Poland,
Romania,
Czechoslovakia, okay, they were all being doped. I mean, they were all. I don't know what chemicals they were using, but there were a lot of jokes at that time about the athletes that these guys were sending, and it's so yeah. But it's not just the Olympics where the doping is a problem. It's a problem in sports, period. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
sports is a very big business now, and if you're at the top of your profession,
pressure to stay there.
You're making $8, $9, $10, $11, $12 million a year, Nick. I mean, it's borderline obscene. If I wasn't such a free market supporter, I'd go, okay, wow. I don't know about that, guys. But look, there's lots of money that gets raked in through television revenues, through ticket sales, through all of these things, sponsorships, selling paraphernalia, gear, and stuff like that.
Are you talking about NASCAR?
Well, all of the big leagues.
I'm kidding.
Okay, and the athletes, the players, are the talent when you think about it.
Right.
So, if you're raking in those kinds of dollars, then why wouldn't they get those kinds of dollars? So, but it's a lot of money. And so they're always looking for that edge. And the temptation has always been to, if you can use some kind of drug to enhance your performance and you think you can get away with it, then, that's what the temptation is. And it's been a problem in most sports where it's not just the Olympics, okay? Professional sports as well. And
that's true. And to point to the salaries some of these people make, I think it was a baseball player a few years ago, signed the first $100 million for 10-year contract. $100 million.
For 10 years, which is only $10 million a year.
Only?
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. But, I mean, the money is... I won't say it's out of hand because you're right. It's free market and it's voluntary. You don't have to go to the ball game. You don't have to buy the paraphernalia.
And remember, these guys are not getting paid a salary per se.
Right.
Really what they're doing is they're getting a portion based on, their contribution.
Right.
Of the revenue that is coming in from their performance. They're like artists, okay?
If an athlete cannot generate at least his salary in benefit to the team, then they're not going to sign him for it.
Right. So it's not just free market. It's not a standard sort of salary where we go, okay, I'm going to hire you for, $65,000 a year.
Well, maybe that's the way to go with the Olympics then.
Well, but in the Olympics, they don't get paid anything. They're not supposed to. They
are
it's supposed to be
amateur sport.
Athletes,
I know that,
and so they're not supposed to. But again, it's such a high profile thing, and where the money is for the athletes in the Olympics is afterwards. If they've done well, then they get hired to do endorsements for sports firms or whatever. It's the free market again, right?
That's right.
So that the pressure to perform well is absolutely there. It's immense. It's borderline intolerable. So, but what do you do? What are you going to do about it? Okay, I'm just saying that I get it. I don't know why, as a taxpayer, I would really want to spend the kind of money in my city to bring the whole Olympics circus to my city, and then have this white elephant afterwards still sitting around collecting whatever dust it's collecting and whatever weeds, and
which is
maybe
completely
we'll plant
different.
A few trees to help.
Which is completely different than bringing in something like Amazon or some large tech firm, which is going to be here for who knows how long and employ how many people and be a huge economic benefit to the community.
Right.
The Olympics are a one-time deal because there aren't many cities that get it more than once, because there's a lot of cities in the world vying for this every year or every time the cycle comes around.
Yeah.
So
Los Angeles got it more than once. They got it twice.
Well, there are a couple, but not many.
Lake Placid got it twice.
Yes, that is true. That's another example. But for the most part, like, when's the next time you think you'll see one in Helsinki?
Were there Helsinki Olympics?
I believe so.
Helsinki.
Or am I thinking Oslo?
Olympics. Oslo?
Norway.
Yeah. Lillehammer. I don't know.
Oh, Lillehammer. That's it.
Lillehammer in Norway,
okay.
Yeah.
The same thing with Sarajevo.
Anyway, look, you know what? I got to say this, okay? To the citizens of Calgary,
well done.
For standing up, well done.
Amen. Now, having said that, though, when the cheering dies down, it's not that we're at least I don't think you are either, anti-sport. I think sport is an amazing tool to teach people life lessons.
Yes, especially rugby.
I was going to say hockey, but...
Yeah, sissy sport.
Sissy.
Rugby union, not rugby league. Rugby league is sissy sport too. These guys,
Yeah, there might be a little bias on the other side of the table.
You know what's a real sissy sport? Soccer.
Oh, man. Look, I'm going to take some flack for this, but I think soccer is the second biggest waste of time ever invented for professional sport.
Why is it so popular?
Because it's cheap.
You think that's what it is?
All you need
Rugby's
is a foot and a ball.
But you see, rugby is cheap too, because you don't wear equipment in rugby either.
Well, you wear
but
shoes
you know what
and
it is.
Funny looking helmet.
Well, it's a scrum cap, and most players don't wear scrum caps.
I thought it was to keep the other guy from ripping your ears off.
That's part of what it helps, but not everybody plays in a position where your ears would get
ripped off.
But the reason that soccer players don't play rugby is because they're sissies.
Well, that's the reason why the NFL players don't play CFL.
Well, it's one of the.
They can't take the speed of the game, and
now you're going to start. Don't start on this because it's a totally different game, and I agree with you that the Canadian football, which is virtually the same as American football, but it's played fewer downs,
on a
larger
bigger field.
Okay,
and it's a faster paced game.
It's a much faster paced game for sure. And
so I'm just doing that to pull your chain.
Yeah. But it doesn't matter because I like football, American football. I like Canadian football. I like American football better. And I had a conversion at one point in time. I think we've talked about that before of how that came about. But for pure athleticism, in terms of a full contact sport, rugby union is still better than either of those.
Maybe better than football, but I joined a hockey pool 2 years ago, and I've been watching a lot of hockey lately, and it's only now I'm beginning to really appreciate the nuances of the game. These guys are not only some of the most highly conditioned athletes on the planet, but their number of skill sets blows anybody else away.
Yeah, look, I'm teasing in that. Okay, I mean, I don't want to disrespect. Well, I guess I have sounded a little disrespectful about some of these players. Well, they bring certain skill sets and athleticism to their games. I like hockey. I don't follow it as much as I used to. Ice hockey is what we're talking about. For those of you who think hockey is just played by
girls on a field,
girls in skirts on a field,
which has its own benefits.
Okay, and we're not going there, Nick. Sorry, we're not going there, Tony.
I wasn't talking about those benefits.
Oh, okay. Well, he was.
I just think the sticks they hold are cool.
Okay, so rugby union. You want to get into a sport that's cheap and that's tough. Rugby union.
You want to make soccer interesting? Cut the field in half and sprinkle it liberally with landmines. Then it gets interesting.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going for a break. We will catch you in about 3 or so minutes. So
stick around. We'll be back with more right after this. All right, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. Half an hour left straight ahead. Hope you stay with us. We've still got some interesting things to discuss. One of them is this decision by the province of Ontario to lift the threat from the OPP and other city and municipal township police or municipal police forces of going under investigation by the SIU should they be trying to save the life of an addict suffering from opiate addiction by
overdose.
Yes, but
overdose. Yeah.
Addiction, yes, of course, but an overdose of the opiate using naloxone, and if that individual should die during an attempt to save his life, they will not be subject to SIU investigation.
SIU standing for Special Investigations
Unit. Yes.
So this is like a civilian body that investigates when somebody dies in police custody.
Yes.
And other things. So they also investigate other issues around the police.
Yeah.
But in this case, what has been happening typically is if somebody is under police control or custody or care, which would be the situation if somebody had overdosed and the police were administering this drug,
right.
an antidote or something to revive them. So that individual would be under police control, and if that person dies, then the way the laws or the regulations were prior to this change, then that individual police officer would then be subjected to a Special Investigation Unit investigation to determine whether there was any wrongdoing
right.
or anything like that. So the government has changed this, right?
Yes, they have, and I think it's a good idea because, first of all, firefighters don't go through this. Paramedics don't go through this. Doctors don't go through this. So why should the police when they're doing exactly the same thing? I think it lifts a tremendous amount of stress off these guys' shoulders because, let's face it, being a cop is a tough job as it is. And now you have to worry about whether, until now, they also had to worry about if this individual was too far gone, as an example, and they're not doctors. They can't, they're just, when I say they're just cops, I don't mean they're just cops, but they're not doctors. Okay? They're just cops out there trying to save this guy's life or this gal's life, and they die anyway. Why should they be punished for that instead of lauded for at least trying? And I think that lifts a heck of a burden off their shoulders.
Yeah, I don't think they were being punished.
Well, if you go under an SIU investigation,
I understand that was just but they'd been investigated and cleared of any wrongdoing. But I think it's still a good policy change. I don't think that people should be subjected to the investigation, and I think it saves resources because presumably, if the police are going to start administering this antidote in the field. That I think it's highly likely that it's not going to. They're not going to be successful in reviving a certain number of overdose cases, and as a consequence, I could see that there would be a significant uptick in the number of investigations that the SIU is undertaking. So it makes administrative sense as well, absolutely. But I think it's. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say I find it ironic that on one level, the government is providing the very poison these people are overdosing on, and another level, the government is trying to save the lives after the fact of the overdose. Now, I'm separating them because municipalities don't generally have control over things like safe injection sites. Usually that's provincial, if not federal. So they, on one level of government, you've got them saying, yeah, it's okay, walk into that shooting gallery and knock yourself out. And on the other level, we're telling the police, look, if you see somebody on an overdose that we may or may not be responsible for, you use this naloxone and try and save their life. I just find it ironic.
Well, it's you're touching on a subject that I'm quite passionate about. When your child, your daughter, your son, and child not being a little child, but a teenager or even an adult child has an addiction problem, you do not want your reaction. You want to help them, you want to get them treatment, you want to get them off of the drug. Your reaction as a caring, responsible, compassionate parent is not to say, okay, don't worry. At least you can go there and you can go to this place here and inject yourself safely. That's not your reaction as a parent.
No, it's not.
And so I have trouble wrapping my mind, Nick, around public policy people, government officials, bureaucrats, who themselves are parents and who would never want that kind of a response if it was their children, implementing policies for other people's children when that's the response. So I feel very strongly about this. I have had in my family, I've had addictions in my family, and I've seen the toll that it takes on everybody in the family, and the answer is that people have to be helped to get off of this stuff. And I think it's absolutely the wrong reaction, the wrong thing to do to have safe injection sites on the notion that we're going to continue to help them to inject safely because that's the best way of saving their lives. I just don't buy it. I think it sends the wrong message. And then you have the irony of all of this, and that is that you provide them not with the drug, because these safe injection sites do not supply the drug.
That's right. I forgot. That's
okay.
A mistake on
So
my part.
they
You're
still
right.
have to obtain the drugs illegally. That's for those people out there who think that that somehow that these safe injection sites actually reduce crime. They actually don't. What they do is the crime rate is really only the reported crime rate, and that goes down because you're not arresting these people when they have these drugs or they want to use the drugs. They take the drug to a safe injection site. So in the city of Vancouver, which was the experimental safe injection site in Canada for a couple of years, what would happen is that the police would pick these guys up, and where they might take them into jail or take them to the hospital to detox or whatever before, and that would become a whole report, etc., what they would do is they pick them up and take them to the safe injection site, okay? And then now all of a sudden you're not reporting the crime anymore. You're not reporting an arrest. You're not reporting an intervention taking these people to the hospital. So naturally the reports, the reported interventions or arrests went down. So people were going, oh well, the crime rate went down. But in fact, people are committing crimes to obtain the drugs that they use at the safe injection site. So, but setting all of that aside, the notion that the best way to help people is to give them a place and give them a needle to inject themselves with poison, and then when they overdose, and they don't overdose generally in the safe when they're in the safe injection site. When they overdose, there are professionals there to deal with the overdose right away.
Right.
So in an interesting way, it's not quite the way you've portrayed it. But they're still addicts. They're not receiving any treatment. There's no intervention. There's no help for these people to get off. There's no expectation that they're going to get off, that they're going to make any effort to get clean. And so they go and they inject themselves elsewhere. They overdose, and then it becomes a police matter or a fire department matter or whomever.
Well, I always look at these safe injection sites. You know how much I like analogies.
Yeah, there's no such thing. By the way, sorry to interrupt, Nick, but even I fall into the trap tonight of calling them safe injection sites. They really are. There's no such thing as a safe injection site.
They're more accurately called a shooting gallery.
Whatever you want to call them, but they are not safe injection sites. That's why they have to have nurses and medical professionals on site, because people regularly overdose in the safe injection site. And it's funny because I was going back to the Vancouver site. I was doing some research on this a number of years ago when they had it open for a little while, and I was talking to some of the people that were involved there, and they were telling me that one of the really great statistics that they had come up with that they were very proud of in the safe injection site, and that was at the time I spoke with them, that they had somewhere in the order of 500 overdoses and not a single death. And now this was a surprise to me, Nick. It was a surprise to me because I remember saying that's a great statistic, but tell me, how is it that you have 500 overdoses in a safe injection site? I couldn't understand that. And this is where I realized for the first time what was really going on here. And when they explained to me that they don't supply the drugs, people get the drugs on the street still, bring it to the safe injection site. They can get a clean needle. They inject themselves, but even the injection is not supervised. Okay. So in the safe injection site, and this had been open now for about a year and a half, if my memory serves me correctly, they had somewhere in the order of 500 overdoses in the safe injection site. And they were proud of the fact that nobody died, which was a marvelous thing. Don't get me wrong. But they had 500 odd overdoses in the safe injection site. And this is the thing people have to understand about these places is that they are not safe. People go there and they get clean needles. Yes, that's true. But the injection is not supervised. It's not properly measured. The quality of the product that's being used, the chemicals that these people are injecting into their bodies, nobody knows because it's bought illegally on the street. The whole thing is it's a farce.
It's very much like providing a drunk with a clean glass. You're not doing anything to break the habit of alcoholism or the curse of alcoholism. You're just making sure he has a clean glass to continue his habit with.
Now, I worry about making a big deal about this.
It is a big deal.
It is. But my fear is that if we make such a big deal of it, my big worry is that then the same people that are in favor of safe injection sites come back and go, you're right. Now we have to supply the drugs. And, of course, now in Canada with legal marijuana,
it isn't that much of a stretch to go there, is it?
It's not a stretch at all. And I hear people talking this way already for that very reason. It's the logical next step.
To me, when I was still on the air, I remember when Chief White was head of police here in Ottawa. I went for a ride around with him. And we went through all the high crime areas and all that kind of thing and pointed out a bunch of different things that I was hearing from the callers. And he was telling me all about, what services are available. And he said, one of our biggest problems is we just don't have enough treatment beds. The wait is way too long. These people drop through the cracks. They go back. Even if we get them off the street, you put them back out there after you dry them out a little bit. You put them back out there, and within a week, they're right back where they were. So we need treatment centers. So I remember that in Ottawa here, they decided they were going to put up 40 beds, and at the cost of several $1 million. And talk about politics. They decided 27 of those beds had to be Francophone, for Francophone addicts. Well, look, if you're an addict, who gives a flying fiddler's fox fart? Thank you, Lowell. For what language you speak. That should be the last thing they worry about. So there's a lot of politics that goes into this. But more importantly than that, Chris and Lisa Grinham are still friends of mine to this day. I haven't talked to them in a little while, but they started up Safer Ottawa. And he was the original needle hunter because he found needles all over his neighborhood and was afraid that one of the children who lived in that neighborhood was going to get stuck with one of these. And I remember going to visit a child who had actually been pricked by one of these dirty needles, and they had to give her shots and do testing to make sure she was going to be okay, that there was no AIDS or anything like that infecting that needle. So he would go around and collect hundreds of these needles with a pair of special tongs that he had and drop them in a Sharpie bucket. So we did a little tour just around the station down there in Byward Market, and in the alley between the ice cream shop and the front door of the CFRA studios, we walked down that little alley wide enough for one car, and if you stacked them tailed in, well, there's no other way to put them in there, but they may be 5-6 cars long. We found 3 or 4 needles right there beside the station. Now, they've done, the city, to its credit, has done a good job putting up places to drop these needles, but they've done nothing to solve the problem of why those needles are there in the first place.
Well, and whatever they're doing to help clean up, they're also supplying free needles. So it's the whole thing is completely upside down. It's a shame. It's a shame that we allow that. We do this in the name of compassion, but I just don't see any compassion in facilitating people poisoning themselves. And the thing about addiction, okay, as you know, it's not rocket science. When you're an addict, you really can't stop it.
No, that's why it's an addiction.
You need it. That's why you need treatment. And I know, we could play the statistics game until the cows come home, where, well, if you force them to be into treatment, it doesn't last and all that. I don't care. There is, at some point in time, statistics can tell us what works better, what doesn't work better in certain circumstances. But statistics has nothing to say about what's right and what's wrong. And my argument is that even if it's true that those people who are compelled to get treatment, forcibly put into some sort of a treatment program, if statistically people who are in that situation, more of them don't or fewer of them remain clean and sober for a period of time than if they go in voluntarily, that may be true. My response is I don't care whether it's true or not. There's a right and a wrong, and the right and the wrong have nothing to do with statistics. And so even if it's statistically not the best solution, it's still the right solution.
And it's a lot better than what we're doing now.
And here's the thing, okay? It's easy to get caught up in the statistics, Nick, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we're not dealing with statistics, really. We're dealing with people.
Yes, that's true.
And there are people who are not being treated now who would get clean and sober if we were focused on treatment as opposed to facilitating the addiction. And if just one or two or three of these people, by being compelled to have treatment, as opposed to just turning a blind eye and saying, okay, well, until you willingly walk off the street, we're not going to help you. We're not going to try to compel you at all. Okay, there are people out there who are remaining addicted and who are dying, who would have lived if they had been pushed into it.
Well, it used to be the case.
It's the people. We have to focus on people, not statistics.
I totally agree with you. I mean, this is a human tragedy, not, as Joseph Stalin would say, the death of one man is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic, and I think we're falling into that trap. But it used to be in the province of Ontario, there were several places like Burris Rapids and Cedar Springs where you could actually send people to get treatment. What about, there's a group we haven't even mentioned yet, and that is, and I'll wrap this up with this because I want to get on to our last topic, but that is, what about people who have mental health issues who are addicts on the street because they have mental issues? You can't force them into an institution against their will, even though they're mentally ill, to make sure they take their medicine so that they can function somewhat normally.
It's a somewhat different topic, but related. It's the same mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, there are people who are not receiving treatment and who are trapped in a vicious circle of addiction, or in the case of mentally ill people, trapped in their psychosis, or however you want to characterize it, simply because we have this misplaced conception of where our responsibilities as society lie. And so my answer is, look, I hesitate to say, round some of these people up. I'm not talking about the mentally ill here. I'm talking about, addicts. I hesitate to say round them up and put them into some sort of, incarcerate them, if you want to call it a special program as opposed to just regular jail.
Yeah.
But some sort of a summary conviction where they're forced to not use, for want a better way of expressing it. And you get off of the stuff and you have a mandatory, what's the word I'm looking for? In-house or a custodial treatment program. And I accept that more people who go through a mandatory custodial treatment program, more people who go through that will not be saved, quote unquote, than if that same number of people went through the program voluntarily. I'm prepared to accept that from a statistical point of view. What I'm not prepared to do is I'm not prepared to sacrifice and turn a blind eye to those people, the individual human beings, who would get clean and sober and have their life turned around if they were just forced into some sort of a program like that. Now, I'm not trying to oversimplify it. I understand that there's a lot of complexity to it, etc. But I just think that this idea of harm reduction as opposed to, or what's been described as harm reduction, as opposed to actually treating it as a crime, but a special kind of crime, I think that it's just the wrong direction to go.
Well, with that, I'll let you have the last word because I don't know that I could add anything of substance to what you just said. Now, there is another topic here in the last 5 minutes or so of the show. It's a little lighter than the last one. This idea, this movement, if you want, towards driverless cars.
I can't wait.
I can't stand it.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea, Nick, but I as you know, I have some vision problems, and at some point,
that's what Uber's for.
At some point, what?
That's what Uber's for.
Well, at some point in
or
time,
taxis.
Okay. Well, at some point in time, I probably won't be able to continue driving, and so yeah, Uber's fine, taxis are fine, but it's a lot of money. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm very intrigued by the driverless cars. I say intrigued because I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea, and I don't know how I would feel, as a passenger of a driverless car.
I was going to say, wait a minute. If you get uncomfortable being a passenger with a car and a driver in it,
I'm the world's worst
Now I can vouch for this
Absolutely.
in person.
Like I'm the guy that goes for the brake. In the passenger seat,
and I'm the guy that should go
imaginary
for the brake.
By the way, I'm not reaching across trying to get the real brake, but I'm not a good passenger.
But my argument is, first of all, when I'm not just driving to get from point A to point B, I enjoy driving. I have done millions of miles of driving, most of it mindlessly behind the wheel of a tractor trailer, getting from point A to point B. That's not fun. That's just a job. But when you have, I went to Calabogie about 4 or 5 years ago as a guest of one of the part owners down there, and we spent half a day on the racetrack in a high-performance Mustang, and I had a ball, absolutely had a riot, and I don't want to lose that opportunity. Now, maybe it'll still be there. I don't know. But the idea...
Nobody's gonna take away your opportunity to drive because there are driverless cars.
Well, that's the trend.
You think so? You think that
Absolutely.
They're going to outlaw drivers?
Well, if you start thinking about the what it would mean to the insurance industry, what it would mean to the auto manufacturers, I mean, the computer companies and the programmers, there's a lot of people have a lot of money invested in taking drivers and moving them to the passenger seat. There are probably always will be a private vehicle that you can get in and it'll take you somewhere. But I'm a bit of a control freak that way. It's why I can't stand public transit. Because I do not want to stand outside in January at 6 o'clock in the morning in minus 30 winds, howling around my ankles while I wait for somebody else to show up and take me where I want to go.
Okay, but that's a separate subject than driverless cars.
Well, no, it's not, because in the bus, it's literally the same thing. You have a driver, but I am not in control. So when I'm out on the highway, I'll decide when I use my brakes. I'll decide when I change lanes. I'll decide all of that stuff for myself. I'll even decide when I switch gears.
Okay, go for it.
Nobody's
taking away.
They're trending away from that. Try and buy a 5-speed today. You really got to look to find a 5-speed in the car.
That's the environmental lobby.
Don't get me started. We've been down that road. In other words, short answer is no, I have no interest in driverless cars.
Okay.
As much as I think there's a lot of people out there who should be in driverless cars because they're lousy drivers.
This is a whole interesting subject because there's a whole question of how do you deal with, for instance, parking violations for a driverless car.
Well, the car would be plated to you.
No, let's make a note. We're going to talk about this in more detail next week because there's a whole series of protocols.
Because parking, I could talk about for
I think
hours.
it's in Phoenix, Arizona. They have a couple of thousand driverless cars as a pilot project on the road. And there's all kinds of regulatory issues and how you deal with the police. And, like, how do the police pull over somebody in a driverless car? Or how do the police, how do you deal with an accident with a driverless car? There's a whole series of questions. So write this down, Nick. We're gonna talk about this next week. So guys, make a note of this. Do your research, and get ready to participate, because this will be an interesting and lively discussion next week around this. Nick, I'm just looking at the time. I see we're running out of time. It's been a good show, and I don't think there's anything more I can add at this stage.
No, I can't either. So with that said, good night, all of you. We'll see you all again next week, and take care. We'll see you then.
Okay. Bundle up, guys.